The words hit me like a physical blow, freezing me in the sterile, bleach-scented hallway just outside the men's restroom. I'd been on my way back from the coffee machine, the lukewarm brew already tasting of regret, when the two junior officers, lieutenants, their crisp uniforms practically screaming their recent arrival from the academy, strolled out, oblivious. "Don't get me wrong, she's probably smart," one was saying, his voice a low, conspiratorial drawl. "But let's be real, Evans. You think a Yemeni speaker with her background just waltzes into JSOC on pure merit?" Thorne's pissed. "Sterling's little affirmative action hire is taking up a seat on the new task force." I felt the ceramic mug grow slick in my hand. My background. The words echoed, expanding to fill the silent space around me, encompassing my mother's face, the scent of incense in her kitchen, the lilt of her Arabic prayers, my father's weary sighs about proving yourself twice. I was Captain Aisha Vance, 28, a junior intelligence analyst with a security clearance that could give the president nightmares, and in that moment I was reduced to a political checkbox. A token. I pressed myself against the cool, painted cinderblock wall, becoming part of the architecture, a silent fixture they walked past without a glance. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird beating against the cage of my professional composure. I waited until their footsteps faded, the sound swallowed by the hum of the ventilation system, before I allowed myself to move. I walked back to my desk, my posture rigid, the coffee abandoned on a random filing cabinet. My cubicle was a testament to my particular obsessions. Next to the standard-issue government monitor and phone was a personal tablet filled with declassified geospatial maps of the Al-Mara Governorate. A well-thumbed copy of Tribes and Politics in Yemen sat propped against my keyboard, and tucked discreetly in a drawer was a photo of my mother and me, taken on my graduation day. Her proud, tear-filled eyes were a constant anchor and a reminder of the chasm I navigated every day. The world of my heritage and the world I now inhabited, where my heritage was both my greatest asset and a mark of otherness. The email summoning me to Commander Thorne's office arrived 10 minutes later, its tone as curt and unadorned as the man himself. My stomach tightened. Had he heard? Did he agree? Elara Chen, my cubicle neighbor, swiveled in her chair as I stood up. Her sharp eyes, framed by black-rimmed glasses, scanned my face. "The lion's den?" she whispered, her voice a low, conspiratorial thread in the open-plan office. "Breathe, Vance. Remember, you're the smartest person in any room they put you in, even that one." I offered her a weak, grateful smile. Elara was my only tether here. At 30, she was a savant with satellite imagery and signals intelligence, a woman who used her caustic wit as both a shield and a weapon against the ingrained boys' club mentality. She saw the institution with a clarity I was still struggling to achieve. Thorne's office was a monument to a different era. Polished wood, devoid of personal effects save for a single framed photo of a SEAL team, faces painted and grim from a time and place he never discussed. The air smelled of old coffee and leather. He didn't look up when I entered, finishing his notation on a paper file, a deliberate anachronism, I was sure. Commander Marcus Thorne, 52, a man carved from granite and old-school doctrine, finally gestured for me to sit. "Captain Vance," he began, his voice a low rumble that didn't invite conversation. "As of 800, you are temporarily assigned to the nascent hostage recovery task force for the Al-Mawi situation." Al-Mawi? The name was a punch to the gut. 23 humanitarian aid workers, 6 of them American, snatched from a convoy outside Al-Gaida. The news had been a sickening, personal dread for me, a nightmare scenario I'd privately feared since my assignment to JSOC. "Your linguistic and cultural knowledge of the region has been noted," Thorne continued, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were a flinty, dispassionate blue. "You will provide cultural advisement to the team. You will sit in on briefings. You will not, under any circumstances, interfere with operational or intelligence assessments. Your role is consultative. Is that clear?" It was a dismissal wrapped in an assignment, a gilded cage. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice thankfully steady. "Perfectly clear." He gave a short, sharp nod. "The first briefing is in conference room 4B in 10 minutes. Don't be late." I stood and left, the weight of his skepticism a physical pressure on my shoulders. Conference room 4B was already thick with the scent of testosterone, stale coffee, and focused tension. A large digital map of Yemen's rugged eastern region dominated one wall. Around the table sat a dozen men, their postures radiating a coiled, operational energy I would never possess. And then there was me. I took a seat near the end, away from the central power cluster. Sergeant First Class Mateo Rivera was there, leaning back in his chair with a deceptive looseness. At 35, he was the Delta Force team leader, the key liaison between the trigger pullers and the intelligence weenies. His gaze swept over me as I sat down, a quick, assessing glance that held no warmth, no hostility, just a flat, pragmatic inventory. Another variable, another desk jockey. He looked away, his attention returning to Thorn, who had just entered and taken his place at the head of the table. "All right, people, listen up," Thorn's voice cut through the low murmur. "We have 23 lives in the pocket of a splinter group calling themselves the Swords of Cotton. They broke from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula 6 months ago, more brutal, less predictable. Initial intel, courtesy of signals and local HUMINT, places the hostages here." He used a laser pointer to indicate a remote valley in the Hadramaut, a jagged gash of brown and ochre on the screen. Valley of the Ravens. Defensible, isolated, we're building a profile. Rivera, your team's initial assessment. Rivera stood and moved to the screen. His movements were economical, precise. "It's a nightmare," he said without preamble. "High cliffs, single access route. A goat could spot an approach from a click out. We'd have to go in fast, hard, and hope they're not dug in. But the terrain matches the profile. It's where I'd stash them if I were a paranoid bastard with a militia." A few grim chuckles around the table. I stared at the map, at the stark topography of the Valley of the Ravens. My mind, however, was elsewhere. It was in my mother's kitchen in Dearborn, a decade ago, the air hazy with cardamom steam as she rolled dough for Malawach. She was talking to her sister on a scratchy long-distance line, her voice rising in frustration. "No, Samira, listen. The Al-Mawi are not with the Barca. They are cousins, yes, but there is a blood feud over a well that goes back to our grandfather's time. The Barca would rather cut their own throats than seek shelter in a wadi controlled by an Al-Mawi subclan. It would be a dishonor. They would go to the plateaus near Al-Masila, where their maternal uncles are. The land remembers, even if the young men have forgot." The land remembers. The analyst in me cross-referenced the tribal map I held in my head with the one on the screen. The Valley of the Ravens was historically Al-Mawi territory. The Swords of Cotton, according to the bio-sketches I'd compiled, were led by a Barca tribesman, a man named Farid al-Barkawi. My throat went dry. This was it, my consultative role. When Rivera finished and sat down, Thorn asked, "Questions?" I raised my hand, a gesture that felt absurdly schoolgirlish in this room. All eyes turned to me. "Captain Vance?" Thorn's tone was flat. I cleared my throat. "Sir, the initial assessment of the Valley of the Ravens, there's a potential cultural geographic conflict." Thorn's eyebrows rose a millimeter. "Explain." "The Swords leader al-Barkawi is Barca. The Valley of the Ravens is firmly held Al-Mawi land. There's an active, generations-old blood feud between those specific subclans. A Barca fighter, especially one positioning himself as a leader, would never place himself and his prize hostages in the heart of Al-Mawi territory. It would be a profound dishonor, a sign of weakness. His own men might question him. The tribal logic doesn't support it." The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than the previous quiet. Thorn studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Tribal logic," he repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Captain, we are dealing with a Salafi jihadist splinter group. Their ideology ostensibly transcends tribal loyalties." "With all due respect, sir," I pressed, my voice softer than I wanted it to be, "in that part of Yemen, tribe is ideology. It supersedes everything, even for them." He leaned forward, his large hands flat on the table. "I appreciate your unique perspective, Captain, but we have signals intercepts suggesting movement in that valley. We have a source on the ground who confirms militant activity. I trust the intelligence gathered by my field operatives and signals analysts over a historical feud. The terrain is right. The intelligence is right. We will proceed on that basis. Your role is to advise on how to interact with them once we're there, not to second-guess the location." The dismissal was absolute, icy, and patronizing. It wasn't just a rejection of my idea, it was a rejection of the part of me that made the idea possible. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. Understood, sir, I murmured, looking down at my notebook where I'd scribbled Valley of the Ravens equals Al-Mawi, Al-Barkawi equals Barka. Feud. I didn't look up for the rest of the briefing. Later, long after the day shift had bled out of the building and the fluorescent lights in our section had been switched off, leaving our cubicles in a dim, blue-haze twilight, I was still there, staring at the same map on my monitor. He's wrong, Alara. Alara rolled her chair over the partition, a bag of wasabi peas in hand. Of course he is. Thorne thinks cultural nuance is what you order with a fine wine. She crunched loudly. But he's also got intercepts and a human source. You've got your mom's kitchen table. In his world, which one do you think weighs more? The source could be misinformed or lying. The intercepts could be a diversion. I zoomed in on the plateau region near Al-Masila, the one my mother had mentioned. The topography was different, more open, less obviously defensible. But it made tribal sense. Probably, she agreed. So, what are you going to do? Let it go and let them plan a raid on the wrong damn valley. I turned to look at her. No. A slow grin spread across her face. Good, because I just so happen to have access to a back-channel GEOINT feed from a French bird that's a lot less bureaucratic about its targeting priorities. Let's see what's really buzzing in your mom's suggested neighborhood. For the next 3 hours, we worked in a clandestine harmony. Alara, with a hacker's grace, pulled in fresh, high-resolution satellite imagery of the Al-Masila Plateau. I pored over it, my near-photographic memory for terrain cross-referencing every wadi, every goat trail, every cluster of stone huts. Look here, I said, my finger tracing a line on my screen. This isn't a natural rock formation. That's a defensive position. Camouflaged, but the shadow pattern is wrong. Alara overlaid the image with a thermal scan from 6 hours prior. Minimal heat signatures, but wait. She tapped a key, adjusting the contrast. Residual heat. They had cook fires going at local dusk, but they're letting them die out. Cold camp discipline. They're being careful. Too careful for a random Bedouin group, I whispered. We found more. The faint, linear scars of recent vehicle tracks leading to a specific cave system that wasn't on any of our standard maps. It was on my mother's, though. I remembered her pointing to a similar formation on an old hand-drawn map she kept, telling me it was a place her father hid during the Civil War. By 2 a.m., we had it. A compelling, if circumstantial, mosaic of evidence pointing to the Al-Masila Plateau as the true location. It wasn't ironclad, but it was a hell of a lot more logical than Thorne's theory. So you've got your proof, Alara said, stretching her arms over her head with a groan. Now what? You going to take this to Thorne? He'll have your head on a pike for going around him. I'm not taking it to Thorne, I said, the idea forming even as I spoke it. It was a dangerous, politically fraught idea, but it was the only one I had. I'm taking it to Sterling. Alara whistled softly. Playing with fire, my friend, that man is pure snake oil. I know, but he's a snake oil salesman who has a vested interest in me being right. Deputy Director of National Intelligence David Sterling's office was the antithesis of Thorne's. It was all sleek lines, modern art, and a stunning view of the Potomac. It smelled of lemon polish and ambition. He greeted me with a politician's practiced warmth, rising to shake my hand. Aisha, so good to see you. How are you finding the task force? He was 45, his silvering hair perfectly styled, his suit costing more than my monthly salary. He saw me, I knew, as a success story for his diversity initiative, a shiny trophy to prove his forward-thinking vision. It's challenging, sir, I said, taking the seat he offered. I'm sure it is, but challenges are opportunities in disguise. He smiled, his eyes crinkling, but they didn't lose their calculating sheen. What can I do for you? I laid out my case. I didn't mention my mother. I framed it as deep cultural and historical analysis coupled with clandestine geospatial intelligence. I showed him the images Alara had pulled, pointing out the defensive positions, the vehicle tracks, the tribal logic. I presented it calmly, methodically, the way I did everything. Sterling listened, steepling his fingers. When I finished, he didn't comment on the analysis itself. He zeroed in on the one thing that mattered to him. And Commander Thorne dismissed this, he asked, a glint in his eye. He favors the initial field intelligence, sir. I see. He leaned back, a slow, deliberate motion. Aisha, this is exactly why I fought for your placement here. This kind of nuanced, culturally grounded insight is what we've been missing. It's the future of intelligence. He stood up. Come with me. He led me out of his office and down the hall, not to conference room 4B, but directly to Thorne's door. He didn't knock, simply opened it and strode in. I followed, feeling like a child being paraded by a proud parent. Thorne was at his desk, Rivera standing before him, both of them looking over a topographic printout. They looked up, their expressions shifting from focus to guarded surprise at the interruption. Marcus, Sterling said, his voice smooth as oil. I've just been given a fascinating briefing by Captain Vance. It seems there are some compelling alternative theories regarding the hostage location that warrant serious consideration. Thorne's eyes flicked from Sterling to me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sir, we've already evaluated the intelligence picture. The operational plan is proceeding. Plans can adapt, Sterling said, his smile not wavering. That's what makes us agile. Captain Vance's analysis, which draws on her unique and invaluable skill set, suggests a high probability of error in our current fixation. An error that could cost lives and, frankly, become a significant political liability. He let the last word hang there, a not-so-subtle threat. I want her assessment fully integrated into the planning process. I want you to entertain it. The command was velvet-wrapped steel. Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knew an order when he heard one, even when it was phrased as a suggestion. His gaze settled on me, and for the first time the dismissive coolness was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Pure, unadulterated resentment. Understood, sir, Thorne said, his voice a low growl. Excellent, Sterling clapped his hands together softly. Keep me posted. He gave me a final, approving nod and left, closing the door behind him. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Thorne didn't look at me. He looked at the map on his wall as if it had personally betrayed him. Rivera, Thorne said, his tone dangerously calm. You heard the deputy director. It seems we have a new priority. Get your team to look at the Almasilla Plateau. Cross-reference every rock. He finally turned his head, his flinty eyes pinning me to the spot. Captain Vance, you will provide Sergeant Rivera with every scrap of data that led you to this conclusion. Dismissed. I turned and walked out, Rivera falling into step beside me. In the hallway, he stopped and looked at me, his expression unreadable. He wasn't resentful like Thorne, but he wasn't friendly either. He was assessing a new, unpredictable element that had just been forced into his mission calculus. All right, Captain, he said, his voice flat and practical. You've got our attention. Let's see if your map is worth the price of the paper it's not printed on. The silence in the Joint Operations Center had a weight to it, a dense, particulate quality that seemed to settle in my lungs with every breath. 3 months. 3 months of the sidelong glances, the murmured jokes swallowed when I walked by, the feeling of my analysis being treated as a footnote in a report written by someone with more field time and less melanin. That ended tonight. On the massive central screen, the drone feed was a study in grayscale chaos. Night vision turned the world a ghostly green. The target compound, a cluster of mud brick buildings in the Marib Governorate I had flagged as low probability, was now a smoldering crater. Figures are figures, moved with urgent, deliberate slowness, dragging a limp form toward a waiting CV-22 Osprey, its rotors tilting in the dark. No hostages. Just one of Rivera's men taking a round through the thigh, a burst of static that might have been a curse, and the hollow confirmation? Sight clear. No packages. I stood at my usual perch at the back of the room, near Alara's satellite station. My fingers were icy, pressed flat against the cool laminate of the desk. The initial, gut punch feeling wasn't vindication. It was a cold, nauseating horror. I'd been right. My assessment, buried on page 7 of the target packet, had been right. The primary location, the one Thorne and his veteran instincts had favored, was a dead end, probably a deliberate leak. And a good operator was paying the price. Commander Thorne stood ramrod straight before the main screen, his hands clasped behind his back. The green light from the feed etched the severe lines of his face, turning his features into a stone monument to failure. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew they'd be fixed on that wounded man being loaded up. He didn't move for a full minute after the bird lifted off, disappearing into the static of the lost feed. The room remained frozen, a tableau of professional shame. He turned slowly. His gaze swept the room, bypassing the junior analysts, the comms officers, and landing with the force of a physical blow on me. There was no acknowledgement, no nod, just a look that held a universe of bitter recalculation. "Vance," he said, his voice a gravelly scrape. "My office, now." Elara, beside me, didn't look up from her screens, but her hand brushed mine briefly, a fleeting arc of solidarity. "Go get M, Cap," she muttered, her usual cynicism absent, replaced by a taut worry. Thorne's office was Spartan, a monument to function. A framed trident, a few plaques, a photograph of a younger Thorne with men I didn't recognize, faces painted, eyes hard. He didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, leaning on his knuckles. "The terrain analysis you appended to the Marib packet," he began, dispensing with any preamble. "The part about wadi accessibility and the lack of recent animal traffic." "Yes, sir." "You were confident." The satellite imagery showed a footpath, but it was too uniform. It looked maintained, not used, and the wadi bed was dry, but there were no recent tire marks or animal droppings in the areas where a compound that size would draw water. It felt staged. My voice was steadier than I felt. The memory of those two officers' laughter 3 months ago was a live wire in my chest, and I channeled it into clarity. "Felt," he repeated, the word a drop of acid. "Intelligence isn't about feeling, Captain, it's about facts." "The facts were in the imagery, sir. I interpreted them." He studied me, and for the first time it wasn't the dismissive glance he reserved for furniture. It was an appraisal, cold and clinical. "Sergeant Rivera's team is back at Bragg in 48 hours. You're going down there. You will brief them on the Hadramaut region. Terrain, tribal layout, possible strongholds. Everything. You will make them believe it." A jolt shot through me. "Brief the Delta team, in person." "Sir, my analysis." "Your analysis just got a man shot," he interrupted, his voice low. "Not directly, but it's in the air. You think this is a game of being right. It's a game of being effective. You need to be effective for them." He jabbed a finger toward the door, toward the invisible presence of the operators, "to listen to a word you say. Or the next man who gets hit might not walk away." The accusation was clear, and it was brutal. My correctness was a liability. I swallowed, my throat tight. "Understood, sir." "Dismissed." I walked out, my legs numb. The weight of it was immense. I was being given a chance, but it was a punishment, too. A test on the proving grounds of the most skeptical audience on Earth. Fort Bragg was a different planet. The JSOC facility hummed with a quieter, more lethal energy. I stood outside a nondescript briefing room, my uniform crisp, a folder of meticulously prepared maps and profiles clutched to my chest like a shield. I could hear the low rumble of voices inside, the sound of chairs scraping. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. Elara had helped me until 200, enhancing satellite overlays, plotting cave entrances against geological surveys. "Just remember," she'd said, yawning, "they're just guys who are really, really good at breaking things, talk like they're smart. Because they are, in a smashy kind of way." I pushed the door open. A dozen pairs of eyes locked onto me. They were dressed in fatigues, faces ranging from weathered to deceptively young. They took in my captain's bars, my analyst insignia, my face. The air in the room changed, grew heavier. At the head of the table, Sergeant First Class Mateo Rivera leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. His expression was neutral, a closed door. "Captain Vance," he said, a simple statement, "no welcome." "Sergeant, gentlemen." My voice didn't crack. Small victory. I moved to the front, plugged my laptop into the projector. The first slide, a topographic map of the Hadramaut, filled the screen. "Thank you for your time. I'm here to provide cultural and terrain context for the suspected hostage holding area." I launched into it, my words falling into the rhythm I'd practiced. I spoke about the Al-Kathiri tribe's historical control of the canyon networks, their long-standing friction with the neighboring Al-Mara. I explained how the recent flooding had made certain wadis impassable to vehicles, but ideal for foot traffic to hidden locations. I showed overlays of cave systems, highlighting which were likely collapsed, which were used for seasonal herding, and which, based on their depth and proximity to freshwater seepage, were viable long-term hideouts. For 10 minutes, I spoke uninterrupted. The room was silent, but it was a listening silence. Then, a grizzled operator with a scar bisecting his eyebrow spoke up. That canyon approach on the eastern side. On the map, it looks like a straight shot. What's the actual rock like? Loose. I zoomed in. Satellite composite and older geological surveys suggest conglomerate rock at the top, friable. It would be noisy. Below, about halfway down, it becomes sandstone. More stable, but the path narrows here, I pointed with the laser, to less than 18 inches with a 300-foot drop. Another voice, younger. The village at grid reference 42 Alpha. You said they're Almara. Would they warn the Kathiri if they saw movement? Unlikely directly, I said, feeling a threat of confidence. There's a blood feud 3 generations old over a stolen water well, but they might signal to a neutral third party who could trade the information. Silence is more valuable than gold there. You need to approach from the west through the Devil's Pass here. It's more exposed, but it's no man's land. No one claims it, so no one watches it. Rivera hadn't moved. Water sources, he stated. They've been held for over 5 months. They need water, a lot of it. I switched slides to a hydrological map. Surface water is seasonal, but here and here, I indicated spots deep within the canyon maze, are known gales, underground springs that surface. The vegetation is a dead giveaway. This cluster of acacia trees, visible on the latest Alera on the latest NRO pass, isn't on any map from before 1990. That suggests a spring surfaced recently, maybe after an earthquake. It's a perfect reason to site a hideout. How do you know all this? The question came from the scarred operator again, not challenging, but curious. My mother is from Tarim, in the Hadramaut, I said, the words feeling both like a confession and a weapon. The stories, the geography, it's dinner table conversation. I left out the part about the secure, encrypted tablet I used for my weekly calls home, the way I'd learned to weave my questions into the fabric of family gossip. Rivera gave a single, slow nod. All right, Captain, what's your number 1? The place you'd put your money. I took a breath. Here, Wadi Dowan, this subsidiary network. I brought up a stunning, high-resolution image of a sheer canyon wall. From above, it looks solid, but the geology shows a layer of softer sedimentary rock here. There are historical accounts, local folklore really, of a hidden valley accessed through a collapse in the canyon wall. The thermal signature from this area is anomalous. Not strong, but wrong, for the ambient rock temperature. I could feel them leaning in, the dynamic shifting. I was no longer a talking head from headquarters. I was a source of actionable, specific data. Rivera's eyes were fixed on the thermal overlay. Can you get us higher rays on that thermal? I can task my colleague, Ms. Chen, to work with NRO on a dedicated pass. We'll have it by 1800 tomorrow. He finally uncrossed his arms. Do it. He looked around the table. Questions for the captain. There were a few more, about goat herding patterns, about local radio chatter dialects, about the lunar illumination for the next 2 weeks. I answered them all, pulling from a deep well of memory and frantic preparation. When the briefing ended, the operators filed out, a few offering curt nods in my direction. Rivera lingered. That was thorough, Captain, he said, gathering his notes. Thank you, Sergeant. Thorne doesn't send us thorough. He sends us certain, or he used to. He looked at me, his gaze assessing. You certain about this hidden valley? As certain as I can be from 8,000 miles away, I said, refusing to blink. A ghost of something, not a smile, but an acknowledgement, touched his mouth. Then get me that thermal, we'll talk tomorrow. That night, in my temporary quarters, I placed the secure call. The video link to my mother's apartment in Detroit was laggy, her face pixelating for a second before resolving into the familiar, warm lines I ached for. Habibti, you look tired, she said immediately, her Arabic laced with concern. Just work, Mama. How is Auntie Layla? We danced the familiar dance. I asked after relatives, she complained about the weather, told a funny story about my uncle's new car. Then, casually, I steered it. Remember those stories Grandpa used to tell? About the hidden places in the wadis near Shibem? The ones with the old incense trails. Her eyes, so like mine, sharpened slightly. She was no fool, she knew what I did for a living. Those are old tales, Aisha, from when the Turks were there. No one goes to those places now. The Al-Kathiri, they stick to the new roads. Except, she trailed off, stirring her tea. Except, oh, there was talk from your cousin Hamid's wife's family. They are Almara, you know. They said some of the young Kathiri men, the restless ones, have been buying supplies in Tarim, not a lot, but steady. Canned goods, batteries, medical things, and they are using old trucks, not the new ones, paying in cash, old cash. She leaned closer, her voice dropping even though the line was secured. They whisper about the Eagle's Nest in Wadi Dowan, a place the British maps never found. It is just gossip, my love. Old women's talk. My pulse thrummed. The Eagle's Nest, a perfect local name for a high, fortified cave. Old women are the best intelligence officers in the world, Mama, I said, my voice thick with gratitude and guilt. Her face softened with worry. Be careful, my heart. Your knowledge is a gift, but it can be a heavy one. Do not let them make it a weapon against you. The next week was a blur of intense collaboration. With Alera's magic, the thermal anomaly solidified into a clear heat signature, inconsistent with the surrounding rock. A pattern of life emerged, infrequent but regular movement at dawn and dusk, spotted by a drone with a radical slant angle Rivera had insisted on. The pieces were coalescing around Wadi Dowan. It came to a head in Thorne's office again, this time with Rivera present. Sterling, the deputy director, was also on a secure video feed, his polished face looking out of place amidst the tactical maps. The evidence is circumstantial, Thorne argued, jabbing a finger at the map on the wall. Thermal ghosts, village gossip, and a fairy tale about a hidden valley. We are planning a high-risk, high-cost operation on analyst intuition. It's not just intuition, sir, I said, my temper, so carefully leashed, beginning to fray. It's pattern analysis from cultural norms, terrain feasibility, and signals intelligence. The Marib site had none of these corroborating indicators. This one does. The corroborating indicators are your mother's tea-time chatter? Thorne's voice rose, his patience gone. We are JSOC, Captain, not the anthropology department. I will not risk men on unverifiable hearsay. With respect, Commander, Rivera's voice cut in, calm and flat. We both turned to him. He had been leaning against the wall, silent. The Marib intel was verifiable. It came from a paid asset on the ground. It got Martinez shot. Captain Vance's tea-time chatter has given us a viable infiltration route, a predicted guard schedule based on prayer times, and a high-probability hideout location that matches the logistical footprint we're seeing. That's more than we had last time. Thorne stared at him, stunned by the interjection. Sterling, on the screen, leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. Sergeant Rivera, you are confident in this assessment. Rivera's eyes met mine, just for a second. There was no warmth there, but there was a recognition, a pragmatic acceptance of utility. Sir, I'm confident that it's the best lead we have, and my team needs to plan. We can't plan on maybe. Captain Vance's analysis gives us a probably. I'll take probably over maybe any day, and I'd take it over definitely wrong we got last month. The room hung in silence. Thorne looked from Rivera's implacable face to mine, where I was trying desperately to keep my expression neutral. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the operational need, the political pressure from Sterling, the undeniable failure of the last raid, and the quiet, firm support of his team leader for the analyst he had dismissed. Fine, Thorne bit out, the word tasting of ash. Build the plan around Wadi Dowan. But Vance, he turned his flinty gaze on me, this is your package now, you own every piece of it. Rivera, you get your thermals, your paths, your cultural profiles. She provides it. Any holes, any gaps, they come back to her. And to me, dismissed. Rivera nodded and left without a word. I gathered my things, my hands trembling slightly. As I reached the door, Thorne spoke again, lower now. A word of advice, Captain. Rivera just backed you because he needs a win, because his man got hurt. Don't mistake pragmatism for faith. I didn't turn around. Understood, sir. Later that evening, as I was drowning in elevation maps, my secure line buzzed. It was Rivera. Captain. Sergeant. That secondary approach, the one through the narrow pass, the geological survey you cited is from 1973. My heart sank. Yes, sir. It's the most recent one publicly available for that specific sector. I need better. I need to know if that pass has held up after the 7 earthquakes. Can your cultural sources help with that? He was asking me to tap my mother's network again, to go deeper. It was a risk and a validation. He wasn't just taking my briefing, he was using my pipeline. "I can try, Sergeant." "Do it and call me Mateo when we're not in Thorne's office." The line went dead. I sat in the dim light of my screen, the weight of the map under my hands. The hurt from 3 months ago was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but layered over it now was something else, the terrifying, exhilarating weight of ownership. Thorne was right. I owned this. Every contour line, every tribal alliance, every whispered piece of gossip. And for the first time, I had the cautious, pragmatic trust of the man who would have to walk into the valley my knowledge had pinpointed. It wasn't faith. It was something harder, and perhaps more durable, a shared stake in a single, dangerous truth. I picked up the secure tablet, the glow illuminating my face in the darkness, and began to draft the careful, familial questions that might reveal whether a crack in a rock wall half a world away was still a secret door. The air in the Djibouti Tactical Operations Center tasted of stale coffee, cooled electronics, and the faint, ever-present grit of desert dust that seeped in no matter how many filters they installed. 4 months. That's how long it had been since the Marib incident, since Commander Thorne had called me into his office. He didn't apologize. He just stared at a map of Yemen, his jaw a hard line, and said, "Vance, walk me through your sourcing on the southeastern Wadi networks again." Slowly. It was the closest I'd ever get to an admission of error. In those 4 months, my life had narrowed to a laser point, a cave complex in the jagged, sun-bleached mountains of Al Jaff. My initial hunch had hardened into certainty, then into a detailed, three-dimensional model built from declassified spy satellite feeds, decades-old geological surveys, and most critically, the fragmented, folktale-laden accounts from local shepherds my mother had helped me parse during our hushed, encrypted calls. I'd traced the ghost of the hostage, a downed agency pilot, from his initial capture to a series of way stations, following a pattern of tribal patronage and smuggling routes that looked like chaos to everyone else. To me, it was a ledger written in the landscape itself. Now, that model was projected on the main screen of the TOC, a wireframe labyrinth superimposed over thermal imaging. The rescue mission, Operation Silent Shepherd, was greenlit. And I was here, in Djibouti, a continent away from the action, but with my nerves strung as tight as any operator's. "You'll monitor from here," Thorne had stated flatly during the pre-op briefing earlier that day. He stood before the bank of screens, a monolith in desert camo. "You'll have a dedicated feed and comms with the analytical cell back at Bragg. Your role is to provide supplementary cultural context if requested. Sergeant Rivera and his team will be executing on the ground. The on-site interpreter is seasoned." It was a polite cage, a back seat with a headset. I'd simply nodded, the deferential junior officer, but my stomach had coiled into a knot. It was Rivera who broke the script. He'd been leaning against a console, checking the action on his rifle, seemingly indifferent to the officer talk. He didn't look up when he spoke, his voice a low gravel. "With respect, Commander, I want Vance on the primary net. Here, in the TOC, real time." The hum of the servers suddenly felt very loud. Thorne's head swiveled slowly. "Sergeant, she's an analyst. She's not cleared for live ops comms. She doesn't have the training to filter essential combat information." Rivera finally looked up, his dark eyes moving from Thorne to me then back. "My team is going into a hole in the ground based on her map of that hole. The tribal landscape out there is more confusing than the terrain. If something goes sideways, and it always goes sideways, I don't want my terp trying to reach a supplementary context cell through a satellite delay. I need the source. I need Vance. On the net. Direct." The challenge hung in the chilled air. This wasn't Rivera being nice. This was pure, unadulterated pragmatism. I was a tool, and he wanted the sharpest tool in his kit within immediate reach. Thorne's face tightened, the scars of Marib, both physical and professional, evident in the grim set of his mouth. He'd been overruled by events once. He wouldn't be overruled by a Delta team leader in front of the watch floor. The risk of comms overload, of an untrained voice clogging the channel during a critical moment, Thorne began. "I'll manage my comms discipline, sir," Rivera cut in, polite but immovable as bedrock. "But my team's ingress and exfil route passes through 3 separate tribal zones her briefing flagged as volatile, conditional loyalty. The condition is the thing. She knows the conditions. I want her to hear what's happening as it happens. She might catch something the rest of us will miss until it's too late." The silent battle of wills lasted 10 seconds. Thorne's authority against Rivera's operational autonomy. The commander gave a curt, sharp nod. On your head, Sergeant. Vance, you're on the primary mission net. You speak only when Rivera or I directly address you. Clear. Yes, sir, I said, my voice thankfully steady. So now, at 200 local, I sat at a console beside the main watch officer, a bulky headset clamping my ears. Ilara was my lifeline back at Bragg, her voice a quiet murmur in my secondary earpiece. Feed looks stable, Aisha. Thermal shows all quiet at the target. You're gonna do great. Just don't let the cavemen grunt too much. On the primary net, it was all quiet professionalism. Whispered check-ins, the soft rustle of gear. I could almost smell the dry, cold desert night through the crackle of the radio. Echo 1 set. Echo 2 set. Rivera's voice was the comm center. All elements, this is Echo Actual. Commence infiltration. Time now. For an hour, it was a tense, smooth ballet. The drone feed showed 4 dark shadows moving like oil droplets across the rocky plain, then vanishing into the foothills. My map was their Bible. They found the dry riverbed I'd marked, the specific rock formation that looked like a crouching lion, the narrow defile that was the back door to the valley holding the caves. My heart hammered against my ribs with a strange pride. They were walking the path my mind had charted. Then, at 3:17, the smooth rhythm shattered. Echo Actual, this is 2. Contact, unscheduled checkpoint. 4-5 individuals armed, blocking the pass, 1 technical visible, they've seen us. The drone feed zoomed, but the thermal signatures were a cluster of white blobs in a narrow canyon, indistinguishable. The audio, however, erupted. Not gunfire, but voices. Raised, agitated Yemeni Arabic flooded the open mic from the team's interpreter. Thorne was out of his chair, looming over the comms station. Echo Actual, what is your status? Are you compromised? Rivera's voice was clipped, calm under pressure. We are static. They're not Al-Houthi, local tribal by the look. They're arguing. Our Terp is trying to talk. Stand by. We listened. The interpreter, a man named Sami, was good. He was using the standard, placating greetings. But the responses were sharp, overlapping, angry. One voice, higher-pitched, dominant. They are asking who we are, why we are in their lands at night, Sami transmitted, a whisper layered with stress. They are saying this pass is closed. They are demanding we leave. Tell them we are travelers lost, Rivera instructed. A rapid exchange. The high-pitched voice grew more strident. He does not believe. He says travelers do not carry such rifles. He says we are either thieves or spies for the men in the caves. He is demanding we surrender our weapons for safekeeping. Thorne's hand slammed down on the console. That's it. They're compromised. Echo Actual, this is Watchtower. Abort. Break contact and fall back to Exfil Point Alpha. Mission is scrubbed. The words were a physical blow. After all this, to turn back at the threshold. On the screen, the white blobs shifted, weapons raised. It was a standoff seconds from becoming a massacre. Stand by, Watchtower, Rivera said, his voice still preternaturally calm. Vance, you hearing this? My mouth went dry. All eyes in the TOC swiveled to me. Thorne's gaze was a furnace of impatience. Sergeant, there's no time for academic analysis. Vance, Rivera repeated, ignoring him. The dialect, the specific grievances, anything, talk to me. I closed my eyes. I blocked out the sterile light of the TOC, the tense breathing of the watch officers. I let the angry, guttural Arabic wash over me. It wasn't the clean modern standard of my textbooks. It was the thick, vowel-chewing dialect of the Central Highlands. The lead tribesman wasn't just angry, he was insulted. There was a particular lilt to his curses, a specific reference to jackals who steal goats and dignity. And then I heard it, a phrase snarled at Sami. You have the tongue of a city rat, but you walk with the stride of the Jadon jackals. My eyes flew open. Jadon. It wasn't a generic insult for jackal. It was a clan name. A specific, minor clan from my mother's stories, known for herding in this region decades ago, before being pushed out by a stronger group, the Al-Nassar. The same Al-Nassar clan that was providing safe passage and support to the kidnappers in the caves. This wasn't a hostile checkpoint. This was a territorial dispute. These were Jadon tribesmen, squatting on a pass they believed was theirs, hunting for leverage. maybe just looking for a bribe from anyone associated with their rivals. Echo actual, I said, my voice sounding foreign in my own ears. They are Jadon. The men in the caves are under protection of Al-Nassr. This is a feud. They are not looking for a fight with outsiders, they are looking for compensation from Al-Nassr or anyone they think is connected. They feel usurped. Compensation, Rivera asked instantly. A show of respect, an acknowledgement of their claim, a toll. Thorne cut in. This is speculation, Sergeant. You are risking the team on folk tales. What do I say, Vance? Rivera asked, as if Thorne hadn't spoken. I dug deep, sifting through 100 childhood stories, my mother's voice guiding me. Have Sami say this exactly. Peace be upon the men of the true rock, the guardians of the old way. The jackals in the cave have stolen from us as well. We seek only what is ours. We offer a gift for the passage, for the honor of the Jadon. Then, offer them something tangible but not a weapon. Medical supplies from your kit. They'll value that. A beat of silence on the net, the longest 3 seconds of my life. I could hear Thorne's furious breathing beside me. Then, Sami's voice, repeating the phrase almost verbatim. The chatter on the other end stopped. A muttered consultation. The high-pitched voice again, less strident, questioning. Sami, guided by Rivera, offered the contents of their Team Medic's field trauma kit. Another pause, then a single grunted phrase. Pass quickly, the night has eyes. A collective held breath released in the TOC. On the feed, the white thermal blobs parted, moving away from our team's signatures. Echo actual clear, proceeding, Rivera whispered. No thanks, no commentary, just the mission moving forward. Thorne slowly sank back into his chair. He didn't look at me. The victory was too bitter, too complete in its defiance of his judgment. The rest of the infiltration was a silent, nerve-wracking trek. They reached the cave mouth at 4:45. The final assault was a thing I experienced purely through sound, a terrifying, intimate radio play. Breaching now, a suppressed crack of gunfire, shouts in Arabic from inside, the staccato bursts of controlled pairs. Echo 2, room clear. Moving north tunnel, tight bend. My map was in my mind, superimposed over the chaos. Echo actual, this is Vance, I whispered, my voice the calmest it had been all night. The north tunnel should fork after 10 meters. Left leads to a dead-end storage chamber. Right descends. The hostage is likely held on the descending path, past a natural choke point. Confirmed, fork present, taking right. I heard the heavy breathing, the scuff of boots on stone. Choke point ahead, narrow opening. The geological survey showed a bypass, a crawl space above the entrance, on the east side. It may be concealed by a rock fall. A moment of scraping, shuffling. Found it, tight fit, going through. The audio became muffled, then opened up. Large chamber, multiple hostiles, I have visual on the package. Package is secure, repeat, package is secure. A new flurry of action. Controlled explosions, brief, intense firefights. I guided them through the exit route, a secondary tunnel that emerged downwind. My world was the whisper in the dark, the interpretation of grunts and echoes, the map only I could see fully. All elements this is Echo actual, package in hand, exfiltrating, time now. As they vanished back into the pre-dawn gloom, the TOC erupted in muted, professional celebration. The watch officer clapped me on the shoulder. People were talking, coordinating with the exfil birds. I pulled the headset off, my ears ringing with sudden silence. Thorne stood up. He walked over to my station. He looked older, the blue light of the screens etching deep lines in his face. He studied me for a long moment, not with anger anymore, but with the weary assessment of a man whose world has just been permanently rearranged. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement of a tool that had become a weapon, of an analyst who had, for one night, commanded the battle from a console. My secondary earpiece crackled. Alara, her voice thick with emotion. Holy shit, Aisha, you just did that. You know that, right? You just did that. I couldn't answer her. On the primary net, as the distant thrum of helicopter rotors began to whisper, Rivera's voice came through one last time, clear and direct. Watchtower, for the record, have Vance on standby for debrief. Her contribution was decisive. Echo actual out. I sat in the suddenly cacophonous quiet of the TOC, the taste of coffee and dust still on my tongue. The map on the main screen was just a map again, but I was not the same person who had sat down at it hours before. The point of no return wasn't a geographical line in Yemen. It was here, in this chair. I had crossed it. There was no going back to being just the quiet analyst in the corner. The proof was in the silence I had broken, and in the lives that were now, because of that broken silence, coming home. The air in the debriefing room tasted of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, a sterile counterpoint to the desert grit I could still feel under my nails from 4 months ago. The mission was over. Silent Shepherd was a clean, brutal success. 23 hostages, all alive, extracted. The team was home, intact. The news vans were already a buzzing hive outside the main gate, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like strange metallic flowers. I sat at the long, polished table, my hands flat on the cool surface to keep them still. Commander Thorne stood at the head, a granite monument in a crisply pressed uniform. To his right, Sergeant Rivera looked more like a piece of weathered leather left out in the sun, his posture relaxed, but his eyes missing nothing. Ilara gave me a tiny, triumphant kick under the table, her face a mask of professional neutrality that didn't reach her glittering eyes. "The official report will state," Thorne began, his voice a low rumble that brooked no interruption, "that actionable intelligence, derived from multi-source analysis, pinpointed the hostage location in the Al Jaf province. This intelligence enabled precise operational planning and execution." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on me for a fraction of a second longer than on the others. Captain Vance provided specialized cultural and terrain analysis that contributed to the intelligence picture. There it was, my name, sandwiched between bureaucratic jargon, a specialized contribution. It was the barest minimum of credit, parsed out like precious water in a drought, yet coming from Thorne it was a seismic shift. 4 months ago he wouldn't have uttered my name in an operational context. Now it was in the official record. His jaw was tight, the words seeming to cost him something, but he said them. He looked at me, not through me, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't warmth, it was an assessment, a verification. I had moved in his ledger from political liability to asset. The balance was still thin, but it was no longer red. "Well, I'd say that's putting it mildly." A smoother, more practiced voice cut through the room. David Sterling glided in, as if on cue, his suit a shade of blue so perfect it looked like it had been synthesized from a clear sky. He placed a hand on Thorne's shoulder, a gesture that made the commander stiffen. Aisha's work was the linchpin, truly inspirational. I felt my skin prickle. He used my first name, a familiarity that felt like a claim. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. The intelligence was sound, the operators executed, that's the report. Of course, Sterling smiled, a flash of white teeth. Team effort. But the narrative, Marcus, the narrative is important too. The world is watching. And Aisha, he turned his full wattage on me, you'll be standing with us at the ceremony. A symbol of what's possible when we broaden our perspectives. Ilara's kick under the table was sharper this time, a silent scream of solidarity. I kept my face neutral, the deferential mask I'd worn for 8 months slipping easily back into place. "Yes, sir." The ceremony was a spectacle of polished brass and fluttering flags on the main parade ground. The sun was a punishing hammer, reflecting off medals and camera lenses. I stood in a line with Thorne, Rivera, and a few other senior officers, feeling like a mannequin in my service dress blues. Sterling was at the podium, his voice amplified and echoing. And it demonstrates that our greatest strength lies in our diversity of thought, of experience, of background. He was saying, gesturing expansively. Captain Aisha Vance, a first-generation American, with her deep, innate understanding of a complex region, exemplifies this new paradigm. Her unique heritage provided a lens through which raw data became salvation. Each word was a tiny needle. Innate understanding. Unique heritage. He was reducing the months of painstaking work, the cross-referencing of geological surveys with century-old tribal migration maps, the sleepless nights listening for dialect shifts in intercepted chatter, the careful, culturally fraught interviews with displaced shepherds to a genetic trait. I was not a brilliant analyst, I was a successful diversity initiative, a profile in modern inclusion. I stared at a point on the horizon, the heat haze shimmering, and let the words wash over me. Thorne, standing rigid beside me, exhaled a slow, controlled breath. I couldn't tell if it was annoyance at Sterling's grandstanding or at my silent, stiff presence. When it was over, a wave of senior officials and press surged forward. I felt a hand on my elbow, firm and guiding. It was Rivera. He didn't say a word, just steered me away from the crowd, his bulk creating a path. We walked past the gleaming vehicles, around the corner of a low administrative building, into a sliver of shade that offered a sudden, profound quiet. The noise of the ceremony faded to a distant murmur. He turned to face me, digging in a pocket of his fatigues. The air between us was still, heavy with the scent of hot concrete and diesel. "Sir," I started, unsure. "Quiet, Captain," he said, not unkindly. He pulled out a small, worn challenge coin. It was bronze, darkened from handling, bearing the crest of his unit, the winged sword of Delta. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, looking at it for a moment before extending his hand to me. "This isn't from the command. This is from the team," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "We have a tradition. It means you're one of us. On the net, in the TOC, wherever. It means your voice has weight. You don't give it unless it's earned." He met my eyes. "You earned it. That call you made about the Wadi being the only viable approach for the exfil vehicles, you were arguing with a satellite feed and a map against a guy who'd been on the ground. And you were right. You saved us a world of hurt. Maybe saved some lives." I took the coin. It was warm from his pocket, surprisingly heavy for its size. The edges were smooth. I ran my thumb over the raised emblem, feeling the intricate details. "I was just doing the job, Sergeant," I said, my throat tight. "That's all any of us are doing," he replied. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. "But doing it right matters. You've got a good mind, Captain Vance. Any team would be lucky to have you on the net." Captain Vance, not the analyst, not Captain Vance from Intel, just Captain Vance. He dropped all the qualifiers, the invisible asterisk that had followed my name for 8 months. The coin sat in my palm, a solid, unadorned truth. It was the only praise that mattered because it was born of shared risk, of proven trust. It was a warrior's recognition, and it was worth more than all of Sterling's polished speeches. "Thank you, Sergeant," I managed, my voice husky. "Rivera," he corrected. "Call me Rivera." He gave a final, curt nod and walked back toward the noise, leaving me in the quiet shade, the weight of the coin an anchor in my spinning world. Later that afternoon, I went to the hospital on the base. It was a clean, bright place that smelled of antiseptic and linen. The hostages had been brought here for initial medical evaluation and debriefing before being repatriated. I wasn't sure why I went. A need to see the human result, maybe, to connect the dots on my maps to actual faces. I stood in the doorway of a sunlit common room. Some of them were there, wrapped in blankets, holding cups of tea. They looked fragile, etched with exhaustion, but their eyes were clear. A woman with short-cropped gray hair, one of the French aid workers, noticed me in my uniform. She said something to the others and slowly stood, walking over to me. "You are with the people who found us?" she asked in careful English. I was part of the team, yes," I said. She searched my face and then her own crumpled. She took my hands in hers. Her skin was papery and cool. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "We heard the helicopters. We had given up hope. Then the soldiers came. They said someone back here had found us, had seen us. Thank you." She didn't see a token, a symbol, a political statement. She didn't see my gender or the color of my skin or my last name. She saw a uniform. She saw a link in the chain that pulled her from the dark. Her gratitude was pure, unmediated by any narrative. It was for the act itself, for the result. In that moment, the reductionism of Sterling, the grudging acknowledgement of Thorne, even the profound validation of Rivera's coin, they all fell away. This was the core of it. This was the only thing that mattered. I squeezed her hands back, unable to speak, just nodding as she cried quiet tears of relief onto our clasped hands. The next morning, I walked back into the JSOC analyst's bullpen. The usual low hum of conversation and tapping keyboards stilled for a beat as I entered. But it was different. The whispers that had once trailed me like a shadow were gone. The sidelong glances that used to measure my worth were absent. Instead, the senior analyst from the Iran desk, a man who had never once acknowledged me, looked up from his screen and gave me a single, firm nod before returning to his work. Another from the counterproliferation cell caught my eye and offered a small, respectful smile. The air itself had changed. The quiet acceptance was palpable, woven into the very fabric of the fluorescent-lit space. I was no longer the affirmative action hire, the curious experiment. I was simply Captain Vance. I had a place here. I had earned it. I slid into my chair at my desk. Ilara was already there, a massive cup of coffee steaming beside her. She didn't look at me, just stared at her monitor, a slow grin spreading across her face. "Took them long enough to catch up," she muttered, then tapped a key with a flourish. On my screen, a simple message popped up in our private chat window, "Told you so. Also, drinks are on you. Forever." I smiled, a real unguarded smile that felt strange on my face. I pulled Rivera's coin from my pocket and set it on the desk beside my keyboard. It gleamed dully under the lights, a tangible piece of the truth. I looked at the familiar clutter of my workspace, the 3 monitors, the notepad covered in my precise script, the photo of my parents. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace, of belonging that wasn't granted but built. The internal validation was a quiet, steady flame. I didn't need Sterling's narrative. I didn't need Thorne's gruff approval, though I valued it. I didn't even need the coin, though I would keep it close always. I had seen the proof of my own competence in the outcome. I had felt it in the handshake of a freed captive. I knew what I had done. I picked up my secure line phone, the action feeling both monumental and perfectly simple. I dialed the long, familiar number. It rang twice. Aisha, my mother's voice, warm and laced with the gentle cadence of home, came down the line. "Is everything okay? It's early there." "Everything's okay, Mama," I said, leaning back in my chair, my eyes on the coin. "Better than okay. I have some time now. I want to tell you a story about my work, all of it." And for the first time, I did.